Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. If this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co-host, MysterE. So, MysterE, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm pretty good, and it's Devil's Advocate 2 Electric Boogaloo. So,
Let's
yeah,
do
today
it.
we've got the topic of self-interest. Or more
Hmm.
specifically, well, self-interest is human nature. And we thought that we might put those ideas to the test.
Yes. And today you will be arguing, and I will be trying to poke holes in your argument and play devil's advocate. So I'd like to see how you stand up to the test, 4IS.
Yeah. I guess maybe my argument is going to be anti this statement because look,
Hmm.
it's definitely a statement that you hear all the time. I
What,
think
that human nature is to be self-interested?
yes, but also an adjacent phrase of it's natural to be that way. And I think you know my feelings about arguments that base their foundation on it's only natural.
Hmm.
Because, like,
Well, tell me, what are your feelings then, 4AS?
okay. Yeah, I, with that statement of self interest is human nature,
Hmm.
I think first you have to preface the argument. And what I mean by that is in like a society that we're in right now, cost of living crisis, housing crisis, and all of that, you kind of have to take those, death by a thousand cuts into consideration because when your general populace is, just kind of scraping by, and they're trying to provide for their families or trying to provide for themselves, and they don't have the mental capacity to think about their current situation rather than just surviving. Like psychologically, it makes sense. Like that sort of idea of, oh well, self interest is human nature because you know maybe some relief or on for rent is 100% what you need, and you're not necessarily concerned about, okay, I've got it, but I kind of don't care that, X person or Y person has got it, or I've got I got a debt in back in 2019, then the whole world went upside down, and the interest rates have completely doubled, and cost of living is completely doubled. Again, that is something where it makes sense that you have a very narrow focus. And that's what this kind of self-interest idea is. Like a lot of like meta economics people or like psychological or behavioral economic people talk about is that your traditional people like Milton Friedman, not Bakunin, Buchanan, I think it is, and Hayek are all about the self-interest and narrow other interest.
Hmm.
And um, if you take that into consideration where we are right now, your idea makes sense of this, but it it repurposes or misinterprets how history has gone down, because that's the funny thing. A lot of these people have relied on, the microeconomics, the Chicago school of interpreting things, which is all about, maximizing profit. Self-interest is king, but also a misinterpretation of Adam Smith. So the classic quote they love to pull out is, "Oh well, the baker, the candlestick maker, they contribute to society because of their self-interest. Like the reason why they do what they do is because of self-interest. However, there's 2 points I would use to counter said argument because that fundamentally is a self-interest is human nature and that's how our society works. One is within the Wealth of Nations, and also the other is the companion document which I've mentioned previously, which is his theory of moral sentiments. Now, the first point is actually within the Wealth of Nations itself, where later down the track, he also mentions how, well, uh, when you have two individuals bartering with each other, or at least exchanging goods, it is an act of beneficence, them bartering with each other. So any keen-eyed person would say, wait a second, that seems like you've totally contradicted yourself from what you've said before. You know, you said it's within my self-interest, but it's also an act of beneficence, and seemingly said like it's mentioning the other interest. It isn't, but it isn't a contradiction because if you know about the second piece of information I would bring about, which is the theory of moral sentiments. Sentiment in the 18th century within itself was not just, oh, my feeling about something and that sort of thing. Sentiments were the combination of feelings and rationality for Adam Smith's time. And what he believed in and what he expresses in the theory of moral sentiments is in society, people and also the community itself have a combination of self-interest and other interest in order to establish people's own interest. So if you take that into consideration, the statement of self-interest is human nature doesn't make any sense.
Right, because what you're saying is that even Adam Smith acknowledged that there was a combination of interests.
Correct.
But like then, wouldn't you say though, given the focus that there is today on kind of the market system and the prevailing ideology behind the profit motive, that therefore self-interest is the predominant form of interest for humans, and whether or not there are secondary interests or other type of interests that might lie in the background, they are very much subservient to self-interest, and that is therefore the driving force behind human nature, because it is the one that everything is centered around. Adam Smith described it in length in The Wealth of Nations, although he does refer to other things, other factors. They aren't the most dominant and therefore aren't the defining characteristic of human nature. What would you say to that?
Well, I will bring it back to what I was talking about with beneficence.
Can you define that, please?
Yes. So what he means by beneficence is basically like a good act, or at least doing goodwill unto other people, where he uses it in the context of that quote, though I was paraphrasing it before, was the act of you bartering with someone in goodwill. Was a community exchange where you needed to kind of trust the other person. Like you knew that society had such mechanisms that every person, whether it was person A or person Z, on the balance of probability, you were going to deal with a person where they were going to give you what you want, and you were going to give them what they want, because he is also dealing with, I guess, Lockean ethics, where if you don't have that kind of understanding of that kind of exchange, then you kind of divulge into the state of nature, etc., etc. And he kind of feels like on a level of beneficence, you need an understanding and you need a sense of trust. Otherwise, society and community kind of breaks down.
So
Now,
are
more.
you sorry, are you saying though that beneficence precludes self-interest being the primary motivation
Well,
in
yeah.
in human nature?
Well, yes, and that's kind of what he brings up in a theory of moral sentiments. But just to kind of give you an idea of what I was kind of talking about before is, let's take Jeff Bezos. He's got his massive amount of wealth, whether it's Amazon and all of that business. You would think, oh well, he's a profit maximizer. He's a um, he owns a massive company, etc., etc. Any of these kind of I guess entrepreneur types, yeah, sure, they have for-profit businesses, but let's consider something like patents. So, they would have a bunch of patents and a bunch of trademarks on whatever their products are.
Mm.
Now, the funny thing about patents or trademarks is that they rely on the community understanding of that is their personal property,
Mm.
or if there is any sort of transgression against them, then they have reason for recourse. If something was completely and only based on self-interest, then why would you need the community, and why would you need that community understanding of that trademark or that patent?
Wait,
So
are you saying that because people respect the law when it comes to patent laws, copyright laws, intellectual property laws, that somehow paints the picture that people aren't actually only acting in their self-interest and they work in some type of a collective understanding arrangement and they respect each other's boundaries? Is that what you're saying?
what I'm trying to say is that under, I'm using that analogy in the sense of establishing that even in Jeff Bezos's world, he he believes in a an other interest, whether that's like in completely narrow. He believes that the law is a thing. He believes that the courts are a thing. And if he believed that self-interest was the only thing that was out there, then why wouldn't he be a Pablo Escobar type figure where he has all of his cash in a vault and all security guards around a the Cayman Islands-esque island, and
Okay, so
him
you're saying the
protecting.
reverse of what I said before. You're saying that because he does have faith in the institutions and the laws and all that sort of stuff, he's showing that self-interest is not the only thing that runs and dictates human nature, because he is reliant upon systems in order to protect his intellectual property.
Yes, there is an undercurrent, or at least a premise of him understanding in society and community, and where he can.
But
Um,
that's a very liberal notion, isn't it? Like the idea that like, okay, you can exist in a free market and you're a free individual and all this sort of stuff, but like to a certain extent, you've got to respect the rules of society, like basic and fundamental laws, and pay your taxes, etc., and like the society will look after you. So they'll form a military and protect your private
hmm,
property from invasion, or they'll form a police force and protect your private property from other citizens. So you're saying that by virtue of them existing in a society, that is, these self-interested individuals, they are actually exemplifying the fact that they are not only self-interested, and they rely largely on society in order to even spout the idea that they only work for their own self-interests.
Well, yes, because in society, not only is there um, self-interest mechanisms, but there are also other interest mechanisms, and it is in the act of working within these self-interest and other interest mechanisms that we find the middle ground, which is own interest.
Right,
Um,
but like, what would you say then to the idea, like, because you brought up this kind of drug lord kind of, um, I don't know, metaphor to say that a drug lord who looks after their own interests primarily, like they provide their own security forces, like which people acting or participating in a liberal society wouldn't have to do, their private property rights, and like physically their private property is protected by the society itself. Um, like, I think let's run with that kind of analogy here,
okay.
because someone like Jeff Bezos is definitely like that when it comes to his accumulated wealth. Like, he would be storing his wealth in like an offshore bank account somewhere, protected by some type of private, I don't know, guard, let's say, in the form of like, yeah, an offshore bank account, in a tax haven somewhere like that. So it's just like a drug dealer who has all of their wealth and goodies stashed behind armed guards on a private island, out of reach of police forces, and etc. etc. So like, I think they are two very similar things. And really, if you look at someone like Bezos, even though they're participating in society, they are actually only working in their self-interest, because they're only participating in society in order to seek profit from it. They're not really doing it because they love the idea of society. And so their human nature, or his driving force there, is just his own personal gain, his self-interest.
Well, yes, but that was also the reason why, the Panama Papers was so explosive.
Mm.
Is that, well, you only have to casually read some Thomas Piketty, and really any of the statistics that are out there. I think the common one that's thrown around is like the 1%, or it might even be like the 0.01%
Yeah.
have the same amount of wealth as the bottom 50% of society.
Mm.
And uh, but that was also the whole point of Adam Smith and the theory of moral sentiments, is that and really what meta economics talks about afterwards with Gary Lynn and all of that, is that society kind of ebbs and flows between the self-interest and the other interest. And if you do develop, if society does progress uh, beyond that kind of framework, then it starts to break down. And what I would say is, well, yes, it would make sense that Jeff Bezos is acting the way he is, where um, uh, he is siphoning off all of his money to the Cayman Islands, because it goes against some of Adam Smith's big teachings in the Wealth of Nations, as well as the theory of moral sentiments. Let's take a concept that Adam Smith talks about, which is what he calls the impartial spectator within the person. So what he talks about there, I'll use a direct analogy that I saw someone use in humanomics. Is someone is walking down the street, and they notice that a man is handing out papers. They're like, oh well, this fellow must be poor, so let me just give him $5. And the person goes to hand him the money, and he like pulls back, and he's like, well, what are you doing? Do you want a paper? And then the person the person who was initially going to give the money steps back and they're like, oh, they're a little bit embarrassed, and then they take the paper and then they hand in the money.
Mm,
So what Adam Smith kind of talks about there, a lot of these things we kind of take for granted because they're instantaneous. But what he was doing is the person makes an assessment of what the person requires. The the person that is the initiator, uses their empathy. They're like, oh, okay, let me see what this person is doing, what they're about, a sense of what sort of person they are, and act accordingly. But then when our impartial spectator steps in, they they reassess the situation and they're like, oh, this person, I don't know, he considers himself a worker. Oh, me trying to hand him money thinking that he was poor. Oh, that was a poor sense of judgment. My impartial spectator moves back and is like, oh, well, actually, he's working. So let me hand the money, take the paper, and then be on my way.
mm,
So the society, or at least the people that we interact with, we kind of, whether it's within our conversation or like straight away with the flick of a switch of analyzing the situation, we correct it in order to function within society. So what I would say with oh, but Jeff Bezos was always going to pursue profit or pursue his money and going to siphon it off into the Cayman Islands.
mm.
I would say, well, yes, he's been allowed to do that. The idea of what an entrepreneur is probably very different in Adam Smith's time than what it is in the 21st century. And
Right.
what basically society as a whole, its impartial spectator, has been put to the side rather than at the forefront of the community.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is because that behavior is, whether, implicitly or explicitly, let's just say implicit, society deems that behavior to be acceptable because no one's really coming together to shut it down like you would in a regulated society if that was within the nation itself, as opposed to these kind of sneaky ways that you can use international laws and stuff to get around. If
Mm.
society as a whole cracked down on that, and found that to be unacceptable behavior, then he wouldn't be getting away with it. And so he wouldn't be only acting in his self-interest because that would be covered for by society's norms.
Well, I would say that the community as a whole, whether it is government, the market, or society in general,
Yeah.
would be regulating the system. That was fundamentally Adam Smith's whole point, is that other people, yourself, and society in general understood the mix of duty along with self-interest, if you will.
Mm.
Like it's all a combination of things, and it's not just one is king over the other.
Right. And Adam Smith directly says that in Moral Sentiments.
Well, he uses it in the various concepts that I've been talking about, which is
Mm.
the beneficence of barter and trade, and you having an impartial spectator, and how you deal with other people, and those sort of concepts.
Mm. Mm. Okay. And so is your argument then only based on a Adam Smith account for self-interest? Or do you have any other kind of viewpoints or takes or interpretations of the idea of self-interest not being the predominant or the prevailing characteristic of human nature?
Well, I think you can very much go to go to socialism and really Karl Marx and the classic sayings of "to each according to their ability, to each according to their need."
Mm.
Like really, that's the reason why I brought up inequality to begin with. Is that I feel like self-interest and the acknowledgement of inequality are two concepts that are very tightly bound. And look, really, this can be a topic for another time. But like, let's even look at a cursory look at such thing as a dialectic. Like a classic dialectic that Karl Marx would have looked at is
Mm.
the whole idea of the contradiction between the worker and the capitalist,
Yeah.
and uh, the idea of self interest and other interest is even inbuilt in that contradiction. Like, sure, the capitalist wants to get as much work out of the worker and um, get as much out of the worker and pay less wage, and vice versa for the worker. But really, in within the workplace, it's also part of the other interest to promote solidarity, join your union. Or for the capitalist, it's also really important that the community functions. Like you actually have vendors that you can do business with. You have roads where you can drive your trucks on. You have reliable um, supply chains, and and again, it's kind of that mix of what is within my self-interest, what is within my other interests and my obligations to society,
Mm.
to reach an own interest, or at least one that where we can all contribute and understand within society.
Right. I get two things. Do you really think, though, that there is this kind of, I don't know, Zen diagram or of interests, and like they all overlap each other a little bit, but equally, and they all live in like this kind of, dialectical relationship with one another, and so you can't really have one without the other, but you can't favor one any more than the other, because, like I said, they're all um, they're related to each other, and play off each other. And two, like what you said about, okay, well, there's a difference of, let's say, class interest between the worker and the capitalist, each looking out for their own interests. But within those two groups themselves, there is solidarity, right? And so that, that puts to bed the idea that people only act in their self-interest because in subgroups they act within common interests. But like,
Mm.
let's take the capitalists, for
Mm.
example, right? Okay, you're saying that, they really have a shared class interest, and so, like, they do business with each other, and therefore, their only interest is not self-interest, but a mutually beneficial arrangement of
Mm.
some sort. But like, what about the laws of competition then? And what about the laws of, well, not even, it's not a law; it's just an unspoken fundamental of capitalism. But like, what about monopoly then? Like, as much as they do business with each other and all that sort of stuff, they like to screw each other for every penny. And ensure that they dominate their industry or their field. As much as, yes, they need each other to survive, I would say that's more of a need to survive, as opposed to a form of solidarity. It's like a predator will feast on its prey, not out of the fact that they're in some symbiosis or symbiotic relationship, or they're related to one another, but like just because it's hungry. So, like, I hear what you're saying, that there is some level of, I don't know, appreciation, let's say, for each other. But I wouldn't say that that is the defining characteristics. And again, I would say their self-interest completely trumps any feelings of mutual benefits and understanding between capitalists.
Yeah, let me do the first one and then I'll go into the second one. But
Yeah.
the first one, the reason why I kind of brought up this framing is I think it's the easiest one to someone that subscribes to this statement of self-interest is human nature,
Yeah.
because I kind of feel like it's a bit of an onion where if you establish, well, actually it's not all about self-interest, there is such a thing about other interest, suddenly you get into the Adam Smith talking points. Suddenly, like, oh, am I part of I'm a working person, oh, I'm part of the working class, oh, actually there's great amount of inequality in society, oh, can I organize and do something about that? Now, I don't think that it's the Venn diagram is the be all and end all, but I think.
Venn diagram, did you say?
Sorry?
Did you say Venn diagram? I think I called it a Zen
Oh,
diagram
sorry,
before.
Zen diagram.
No,
Okay.
I think I called it a Zen diagram before. That's
Okay,
hilarious.
right,
Yeah,
fair
yeah.
enough.
Sorry.
You know what? That's probably a good pun. No, but like, I think I understand what you were trying to say is that like
Yeah.
everything is in balance.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I understood at least, maybe implicitly what you were trying to say
Yeah.
is that like, I guess what you were kind of pointing at is like, oh, it's like an Overton window looking at things, but
Yeah.
but what I would say is it's an easy argument to make for someone to break down their understanding, or at least it's decent counterpoints for people to be like, no, it's not just one way. Actually it's very easy to show you that there is other interests in society, and really somewhere in the middle is how you function in society, whether that is 1 hour in your job being self-interested, and then in the next having a meeting with a client and having a meeting with your manager and your team, and then being interested to collaborate and work on the project. Like we kind of shift through these avenues of self-interest and other interests all the time so seamlessly. We 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 only see the stories that were retold to ourselves, and the other interest lives in the gaps. And look, this is something that we've said before on the podcast. So what I would say is, once you start questioning and saying like, oh, well, actually, yeah, I'm part of working people, and I'm a working person, then suddenly you do start to ask more and more questions that I believe leads you towards socialism and communism and anti-capitalism, all the isms.
Yeah.
And
All
you
the
start
isms.
questioning your world. It's just, I think it's a good, like, that sort of liberal mindset is a good opener. It's not the end destination.
Yeah.
Your second point about, well, what about monopolies? What about
Coercive competition.
yes? Well, that is because we live in a society where I guess the other interest is hardly seen and the self-interest is maximized, where those sort of monopolistic tendencies, like really, like all you have to do is look towards the history of America in the 20th century, which led to like the Great Depression and all of that. Like there were regulations that barred, the robber barons and the big oil companies from having those sort of monopolies. They had to break them up because of the inequality, and really, as we've seen in the 2008, and the fact that the government bailed out the companies and the banks that brought this problem to begin with, and didn't even bother to bail out the people that were signed up to these insane lending to begin with.
Mm.
Uh, like that is the problem within itself.
Yeah.
It is capitalism, but let me answer directly what you were trying to say before.
Yes.
Is like, oh well, isn't that like that sort of self interest for the company for the person? Uh, yeah, but that's ultimately their self interest, right? What I
Mm.
would say to that is, well, yeah, they're allowed to do that, that not necessarily that it is good for society and themselves. Like, if you let a virus get out of control, it's going to consume everything until there is nothing left. Like, it's and to be honest, it consuming everything else is not in the virus's self interest either.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just going to act in that way because you have let it act in that way until it is no more.
Yes. Yes. But like, Marx makes a good point in Das Kapital, and like there's this kind of, yeah, like you said, an idea of a virus. It doesn't want to kill its host because it wants to be able to survive within it
Hmm.
in that ecosystem. A good parasite would never do that. It keeps its host alive just enough in order to live off it. And so, like, in that vein, though, if you had to regulate, let's say we're talking about the capitalist class still, if you have to regulate the capitalist class in a paternalistic style to protect them from themselves, regulating them, like I said, in a paternal way, doesn't negate the fact that they're operating solely within their self-interests, even if it is in their self-interest to actually regulate them in the long term. Like, they're still operating with their self-interest primarily.
Yeah, but what I would say to that is, yeah, but that's because we're dealing with companies that are prime for the bad capitalism that we see today.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
if we had a different sort of company structure,
Yeah.
like, look, I'm going to bring it up again, cooperatives.
Yeah.
Then
Uh-oh. Ding, ding, ding. We should have
yes,
like a little like soundboard. So like when you say cooperatives, like, yeah, some music plays or something like that.
yeah.
Like you
Do
start,
lee lee
yeah,
lee lee
you can
Yeah,
start
yeah.
dancing.
Fair
Yeah.
enough. Yeah, like I'm gonna bring it up again. Worker cooperative.
Yeah, yeah.
If you have a company structure in a society that is far more egalitarian, like yeah, is far more egalitarian, then maybe that company and how it works is again a much more egalitarian focused and less on the profit motive, but maybe about maximizing the other interests of the workers as well as society, then you might have a different outcome.
So are you saying then fundamentally the problem is not human nature at all, but it is the material circumstances in which the kind of perceptions and ideology are actually constructed, which gives you this um, ostensible belief that self-interest is human nature. It's just the circumstances, the environment, if you will, that is producing this culture.
Well, yes, that's the reason why I framed everything at the beginning as death by a thousand cuts. Is that
Very interesting.
it's it's the fact that you're in a cost of living crisis, you're in a housing crisis, uh, you're struggling to pay your groceries, even though Woolies and Coles are recording record profits. Uh, if you live in that sort of world,
Yeah.
hey, it makes sense. You
It
think
makes
that
sense.
self-interest is human nature.
Yes.
But as soon as you scratch the surface
Yeah.
and, hey, you take a cursory glance at Adam Smith, the
Yeah.
poster boy of these great entrepreneurs,
Yeah. Who's
you,
being taken out of context, you'll say.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
As soon as you look at their poster boy,
Yeah.
that's really not how society works.
Yeah, the house of cards, it comes falling down, doesn't it? It comes crashing down once you
Yeah,
start picking at it like that. Yeah, it's built on a false premise to start with.
yeah, which is fundamentally my argument. Yeah, I was actually talking to someone recently, and I did my spiel of what I was talking about, and they turned to me and was like, "Oh, 4IS, you're talking nonsense," and I was like, "Oh, well, like I just explained to you all the reasons of why I think so. Like, hey, the whole Adam Smith thing, it's taken completely out of context," and then he started talking about how unequal society is and how stuffed everything is, and I was like, oh well, there's your problem right there. If you weren't stressed out of your head that you had all these bills and all of this and all of that, um, and you just stopped to, I guess, smell the roses of what's around you, maybe you wouldn't think that.
Hmm. Hmm. Very interesting. Shattering people's worldviews, therefore, I guess, by the sound of it. And I think we've come full circle to the start of your argument. So I'm going to wrap it up here. I think you've actually convinced me. I tried to hack at you as much as I could. But like, yeah, I like how you've rounded that argument out for us, and I'm sure all of our viewers are absolutely enthralled by what you've been saying, and they will never question you ever again for IS. And I will be joining the cult of 4IS very shortly. But like, just before we wrap up officially, though, or close out today's episode, let's do our final segment.
Ah,
What's that synthwave art? And look at that. Like, yeah, I was surprised when I saw that one. I don't know what this has got to do with self-interest. It looks like, I don't know, some Michael J. Fox movie from, I don't know, the 80s or something like that. Um, it's just
oh,
missing like a crazy mad scientist guy in there
yeah,
as
I've
well.
I've got to I've got to be honest with you.
Like,
I literally typed in people discussing self-interest and other interests in society, and it gave me that.
well, you know what? It's funny because these three people, while they are in close proximity to each other, standing in like a circle, um, and like appear to be within each other's presence, the way they're positioned, it looks like they actually have no idea that there are other people there. They look completely disengaged from their social context. They look like they're looking past each one of them and they're in their own world. So actually, I take back everything I said. The AI again is an absolute genius here, and we'll soon all be working for this AI system. So, um, if I've ever spoken bad about you AI, just remember that I'm sorry, and please employ me in the future.
Okay, well, that humor is a great way to cap off this episode. So everyone, remember to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed today, and remember to keep thinking and keep learning.
Mm.
And I'll give it off to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much, 4AS, and to all of you out there, I would like to reiterate that. Please like, share, and subscribe for more. Until next time, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.